The people of Pine Ridge, a quiet settlement cradled by snow-dusted peaks and endless forests, knew Sophia Lane as the warm-hearted woman who served the finest green chili stew in all of Montana. Her little restaurant sat on Main Street in a restored Victorian home, its wooden beams glowing under soft lantern light each evening. Locals came for comfort food and the kind of welcome that made them feel safe. Yet no one in town guessed that Sophia had once been part of a world where safety was a fragile illusion. She moved with a grace that made her seem younger than her 39 years, her dark hair always tied back neatly, her eyes a sharp amber that seemed to read the room in a heartbeat. She wore black jeans, sturdy sneakers, and a burgundy apron over a chef's coat that somehow remained spotless no matter how busy the kitchen became. A faint scar traced her left forearm, mostly hidden beneath rolled sleeves, a mark of a life no one here imagined she had lived. Every morning before dawn, the scent of fresh bread and simmering sauces would drift from her kitchen windows, carried down the street to mingle with the scent of pine and wood smoke. The townsfolk loved that smell. It meant Sophia was already at work, turning her space into the unofficial heart of Pine Ridge. People celebrated birthdays in her dining room. High schoolers bussed tables under her patient instruction, and the sheriff herself often stopped by for a coffee before starting her rounds. A few had theories about her past. Old Ben from the hardware store swore she had military training, claiming she stood straighter than any soldier when the anthem played. The postmistress hinted that Sophia had run from a bad marriage, explaining why she never got personal mail. The sheriff noticed that Sophia always kept sight of every door and kept her knives sharp enough for surgery. Yet all of these theories were only fragments of a truth far stranger. Hidden beneath the mountain hearth was a narrow stair leading to a false wall that masked a secret room. No official plan showed it. Inside was an armory of weapons, tactical gear, encrypted communication tools, and cash reserves, each item maintained with the precision of someone who expected to need them at any moment. Every Sunday night after closing, Sophia descended there, checking equipment, scanning news from far-off regions, and letting the mask slip for a moment. Down here, she was not Sophia Lane the cook. She was the ghost of another life. 7 years ago, that other life had ended in a desert halfway across the world. Sophia Lane had not existed before Pine Ridge. The woman who created her had been Staff Sergeant Sophia Voss, a special operations operative whose unit had stumbled onto something they were never meant to see. The official report said she died in the operation that followed. The truth was that she had escaped, erasing herself from every record and disappearing into the wilderness of civilian life. Her restaurant staff had become her family. Emma, a single mother working the evening shift, often stayed late to help with inventory, telling stories about her daughter's school projects. John, her quiet line cook, worked with the efficiency of men she once served beside. Pete, an old dishwasher, had been with her since opening day. These were the closest bonds she allowed herself, fragile threads of normal life she hoped would never be cut. But on one cool October morning, Sophia noticed a black sedan parked across the street, tinted windows hiding the driver. It had been there 3 days in a row, always with a different person behind the wheel. They carried themselves like professionals, small earpieces barely visible, eyes scanning too systematically. This was no casual visitor, this was surveillance. Sophia adjusted the specials board in the window, catching glimpses through the glass without looking directly. Her mind cataloged every detail, posture, clothing, movements. They were not federal agents or local deputies. They were private contractors, the kind hired for operations that didn't make headlines. Her pulse quickened, but her expression stayed calm as she returned to the kitchen. She had always known this day could come. 7 years was longer than most people in her situation lasted. She had hoped for more time, enough to see Emma's daughter graduate, enough to keep pretending she could live with small-town worries instead of the kind that came with rifles and encrypted codes. Yet the first sign had arrived, and now the game had begun again. By mid-afternoon, more signals appeared. A utility truck lingered too long by the rear alley, pretending to check power lines that didn't need repair. 2 hikers ordered coffee, but studied the building instead of the mountain view. A woman claiming to be from the health department asked about her kitchen layout in ways unrelated to food safety. All of it formed a net tightening around her. each piece slotting into a pattern she recognized instantly. Her muscles remembered before her mind spoke the words. The quiet life was over. The next move would decide who survived the night. The following day began with the same ritual Sophia had kept for years. Yet beneath the surface, every sense was tuned to the slightest ripple in the calm. The sedan across the street was gone at sunrise. But she knew that meant nothing. It was simply out of sight, perhaps repositioned somewhere with a better angle. She moved through her morning routine like any other day, grinding coffee beans, arranging fresh-cut flowers on the tables, preparing dough in the kitchen. Customers came and went, laughing, chatting, and utterly unaware of the quiet calculation behind Sophia's every movement. She listened for unfamiliar footsteps, watched for eyes that lingered too long, traced the routes each customer would take if they needed to flee. By midday, the pattern became undeniable. A delivery van passed the front of the restaurant twice before parking where it could see the back alley. A man in tailored hiking gear sat at a table for nearly half an hour without touching his drink, his eyes subtly mapping the entrances and exits. A woman in a business suit wandered in asking strange questions about emergency response times in the town, each of them pretending to be something they were not. Sophia had seen this dance before, the slow circling of predators before the strike. Every operative's instinct inside her was awake now, mapping threats, measuring time, predicting moves. She smiled for customers, refilled coffee cups, and offered warm greetings, all while rehearsing every escape route in her head. Emma stopped at the counter to ask about an evening shift change. Sophia nodded absently, watching through the reflection in the window as a second van joined the first across the street. These weren't chance arrivals. The pieces of a trap were moving into place. The decision came quietly, without drama. She could not risk her staff or customers being here when a storm arrived. She told them there was a suspected gas leak, something that needed checking before dinner service. Emma frowned at losing the evening's tips, but Sophia pressed cash in her hand and told her to take her daughter to see that movie she had been talking about. The younger woman's expression softened, though she didn't understand. When the last of the staff stepped out the back, Sophia locked the front door, flipping the sign to closed. The street outside looked calm, yet the air itself felt heavier. She knew they were watching, waiting for the place to empty completely before they moved. She slipped downstairs, the door closing behind her without a sound. In the hidden room, she peeled off her apron and chef's coat, replacing them with dark tactical clothing that fit her like a second skin. She checked each weapon with practiced hands, loaded spare magazines, secure knives, and scanned the external camera feeds. Through the grainy view of the monitors, she counted 6 figures coordinating their positions, 2 at the rear alley, 2 in the street, 2 more likely waiting in vehicles just out of sight. Each moved with disciplined precision. No wasted steps, no casual gestures. They were professionals, and they were here for her. An encrypted phone on the table buzzed once, a frequency known only to her and one other person. She powered it on. A short coded message appeared. Phoenix compromised, Apex active. Run, signed with the ID of Robert Hale, her last surviving teammate from the operation that had destroyed their unit. The warning settled into her chest like cold iron. Apex, the private military force that had tried to erase them years ago, had finally found her, and if they had found Robert as well, then neither of them had much time. She looked around the small room, the weapons, the walls, the quiet hum of the gear that had stood ready all these years. This life she had built in Pine Ridge had been her sanctuary, but she had never allowed herself to believe it could last forever. Tonight it might all burn, but she was not going quietly. Outside, shadows began to lengthen across the street, the day's last light fading into the jagged outline of the mountains. Sophia tightened the straps on her gear, her mind shifting fully into the cold clarity of combat readiness. The hunters thought they were closing in on prey, but they were about to find out that she was not running. She was waiting. Night dropped over Pine Ridge like a curtain. The air was sharp with the scent of wood smoke and the quiet hum of insects in the dark. Sophia stood in the shadows of her kitchen, her breathing steady, her focus absolute. She had mapped every step she would take, every piece of cover she could use, every angle from which the attackers might come. The first sign was the faint crunch of boots in the alley gravel. barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator units. A soft click came next, the sound of a lock being tested, then the dim flash of a signal light through the front windows. The strike was beginning. They came fast, the front windows bursting inward in a spray of glass as figures in black tactical gear poured through. Two more forced the rear door, their weapons up, their movements smooth and deliberate. They expected a frightened civilian, but what they found was someone who had been waiting for this exact moment for 7 years. Sophia moved low and fast, swinging a cast-iron skillet into the first man's arm as he tried to bring his weapon to bear. The blow rattled him. His gun clattering to the floor, she was already on the next, using the prep counter as a barrier, sliding into the shadows before they could adjust their aim. Smoke began to fill the space, not from their grenades, but from the kitchen's own fire suppression system, triggered remotely from the hidden room downstairs. Thick foam sprayed across the dining area, blinding the attackers and turning their coordinated advance into a chaotic shuffle. Through the haze, she saw an elderly couple who had lingered too long in the corner booth. Frozen in fear, she moved toward them, keeping low, guiding them toward the service exit. The man's eyes met hers, and though he didn't know who she really was, he understood enough to follow without question. A flash of movement in her periphery drew her attention. One of the operatives rounded the corner with a taser ready. She closed the distance before he could fire, driving a steel kitchen knife into the padded joint of his shoulder, disabling the arm without ending his life. He crumpled with a sharp intake of breath. From somewhere in the foam-filled dining room came a voice, low and cold, calling her by a name she had not heard in years. Sergeant Voss. It's over. You cannot win. She ignored it, moving through the familiar terrain of her kitchen like it was a battlefield. Every doorway, every blind spot working in her favor. Two more men went down, one caught in a tripwire she had built into the basement entrance, the other locked in the walk-in cooler with the electronic latch engaged. In less than 5 minutes, the assault had stalled, their numbers halved, their momentum broken. She could hear orders being given over encrypted comms, a retreat being considered. She took the chance to slip into the back corridor, keeping to the darkest shadows. Reaching the alley, she saw the remaining vehicles idling with their engines running, their headlights off, the silhouettes of the last few operators moving toward extraction. She could have run then, disappeared into the night. But her instincts told her this was only the first wave. Somewhere out there, Robert Hale was also being hunted, and if they wanted both of them, they would keep coming. This skirmish had bought her only a few hours at most. She adjusted the strap on her pack, disappearing into the deeper shadows beyond the alley. The restaurant behind her was silent now, but she knew it was no longer hers. The life she had built inside those walls was gone, replaced once again by the life of a soldier in enemy territory. By the time she reached the edge of the pine forest, the moon had risen above the mountains, casting the valley in silver. She looked back only once at the town that had been her refuge, then turned away, walking into the darkness toward the only person she could still trust. The mountain night was cold enough to bite through her jacket. The path ahead was nothing more than a game trail winding between black shapes of pine. Sophia kept her pace steady, every step chosen to leave the faintest trace, her mind tracking the rhythms of the forest around her, an owl's cry in the distance, the shifting of small animals in the underbrush, the sounds of a living wilderness. Hours passed before she reached the old fire lookout tower, its skeletal frame rising above the treetops like the bones of a long-dead sentinel. The wind moaned through its wooden beams, carrying the scent of resin and distant snow. A figure emerged from the shadowed base, rifle held ready, stance steady as stone. Robert Hale stepped into the pale light, older than she remembered, streaks of silver in his dark hair, deep lines etched by years of looking over his shoulder, yet his eyes still carried the same sharp focus she had known in the field. He lowered the weapon as she approached, his voice low. "You made it." They climbed the creaking stairs together, the boards flexing under their weight. At the top, Robert had set up a small command post, maps spread across a folding table, a laptop connected to a tangle of encrypted comms gear, the glow of its screen casting pale light across his face. Without a word, he opened a file, lines of text and grainy photos filling the display. Sophia scanned them. Feeling the weight of recognition settle into her chest, Apex Defense had not stopped after Syria. They had expanded, moving their black operations into new regions, contracting with foreign powers, arming both sides of conflicts for profit. The hard drives we took, Robert said, I've been decrypting them for years. It's worse than we thought. Weapons testing on civilians, psychological conditioning programs, human trials with experimental bioweapons, all carried out under the cover of anti-terror missions. Sophia leaned over the table, scanning the financial records, the names of shell companies, the coded entries for transactions in war zones, each line a scar in the ledger of a hidden war. The Syrian compound had never been about stopping terrorists. It had been a black site, run with the cooperation of local forces. The prisoners were not combatants. They were refugees, taken from camps and sold for experimentation. She felt her jaw tighten, the memory of that night sharp and bitter. Their unit had been sent not to save lives, but to erase the evidence. The deaths of their teammates had been calculated, an airstrike ordered while they were still inside. The work of a man they had once trusted. General Thornfield, Robert said, pulling up a photo of the man's stern, unyielding face. He's Apex's director of special operations now. He gave the order in Syria, and he's been hunting us ever since. Sophia's mind ran through the list of their fallen comrades. Phoenix, Raptor, Hawk, each one gone under circumstances made to look like accidents. Each one silenced before they could speak. The evidence was enough to bring Apex down, but only if it reached the right people. Robert had compiled a list: investigative journalists with a history of breaking military scandals, congressional committee members known for pushing oversight, international war crimes prosecutors, but contacting any of them carried risk. Apex had influence in every corner. We can't just send this to one person, Sophia said. We release it to all of them at once, multiple channels. Apex can't shut them all down. Robert nodded slowly. I've got the secure relays ready, but once we transmit, they'll know exactly where we are. Sophia looked out through the tower windows at the dark sweep of the forest, the moonlight silvering the distant ridges. They'll come anyway, she said. At least this way the truth gets out before they do. Robert began preparing the transmission, encrypting the files, routing them through layered networks. The hum of the equipment was the only sound for long minutes. Then a faint ping marked the first packet's departure. Once it started, there would be no turning back. Sophia checked her rifle, feeling the familiar weight settle into her hands. Every instinct told her the fight was already on its way. She caught Robert's eye across the table, and he gave a single nod. No need for words. They both understood. This was the point where the mission changed from survival to justice. The first transmissions were away, but the progress bars still crawled for the rest, each file a dagger aimed at the heart of Apex. The cold night air drifted through the tower windows, carrying a stillness that Sophia knew could only mean one thing. The hunters were closing in. Thermal imaging on Robert's screen lit up with heat signatures moving through the tree line. Dozens of them, split into squads, their approach deliberate. No rush, no mistakes. They knew they had numbers on their side. Above them, the faint pulse of a helicopter's searchlight swept over the ridges, a quiet warning that escape would not be easy. Robert glanced at the map. 3 fallback routes, he said, but they'll have guessed at least 2. Sophia studied the lines, the slopes, the gullies, her mind reshaping the terrain into a battlefield. What about here? She pointed to a narrow pass 2 miles north, a dead end unless you knew where to look. It's an old mining cut. Dangerous if you don't know the ledges. Robert's eyes sharpened. And perfect if you want to box them in. They shut down the tower equipment, leaving the final uploads on an automated loop through a backup satellite link. Whatever happened to them, the files would keep moving until every recipient got them. Robert packed his rifle. Sophia slung her gear, and together they vanished into the trees. The march to the pass was silent but urgent, every step calculated to leave minimal trace. Sophia led the way, remembering the layout from a hike years ago. Back then she had noticed the way the canyon narrowed before ending in a sheer wall. She had filed it away, the way soldiers do with anything that could be useful later. The moon was high when they reached the mouth of the pass. From here, the walls rose steep on either side. Loose rock underfoot, shadows deep enough to hide movement. Robert took position at a bend that gave them full sight of the approach. Sophia moved higher, climbing to a ledge where she could see both the entry and the exit. It didn't take long. The first squad appeared at the far end, moving in a tight formation of professionals who had done this 100 times. More shadows moved behind them. The faint click of radios carrying in the cold air. Sophia waited until the lead elements had passed the halfway point before she gave the signal. Robert's first shot was not at them, but at the canyon wall above. The round cracked into a section of loose shale they had identified earlier. The rock gave way with a groaning rumble, sending a cascade of stone down onto the narrow path. The attackers scrambled for cover, their formation broken. Sophia's fire came next, not to kill, but to push them deeper into the pass. Every round placed a herd them where she wanted. The second collapse was smaller, but enough to block their retreat. Now they were trapped between two fresh rockfalls, the canyon, their own prison. The confusion bought them precious minutes, enough to plant their final move. Robert pulled a compact device from his pack, a field rig he had built for emergencies. Sophia covered him while he armed it. The pulse charge would fry any electronics in range, comms, optics, even the helicopter above if it flew too close. When it detonated, the blast was soundless, but the effect immediate. The attackers' radios went dead. Their night vision optics flickered out. The helicopter's searchlight vanished into the dark. Panic rippled through the canyon as their coordination collapsed. Sophia and Robert slipped away along a hidden ledge, their path invisible from below, the shouts of the trapped operatives fading behind them. By the time Apex cleared the rockfalls, they would be gone, and the files would already be in the hands of journalists, investigators, and prosecutors around the world. At dawn, they stood on a ridge overlooking miles of untouched wilderness, the sun rising behind them, painting the snow peaks gold. Robert looked over. So what now? Sophia adjusted the strap of her pack. Now we make sure they can't rebuild. Apex will throw everything they have at us, and we'll be there every time they try. They turned north, vanishing into the trees, leaving no trail, only the cold wind moving through the pines. Far below, in the narrow pass, Apex's best lay stranded and blind. Their mission failed before it had truly begun. And somewhere far from these mountains, the truth about Syria, about the murders, about Apex itself, was breaking into the light. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Sophia Lane was no longer hiding. She was hunting.